Don't come back." The words were soft, almost gentle. That made them worse. Your sister made her choice. It was raining that night. Not the cinematic kind with thunder and lightning. Not the kind that gives you permission to cry without being seen. Just a steady, cold drizzle that blurred the streetlights outside our childhood home and turned the driveway into a mirror of dull reflections. The kind of rain that doesn't demand attention, but lingers. I stood in the hallway with my suitcase. By my side, the handle pressed into my palm so tightly it left a crescent mark in my skin. My fingers were numb, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold creeping through the doorframe or from the shock settling into my bones. My mother wouldn't look at me. She stood near the kitchen archway, arms folded, not defensive, not open, just closed. Her wedding ring caught the overhead light as she shifted slightly, the metal flashing like a warning. Her lips trembled, but she pressed them together as if emotion itself were something inappropriate. My father kept his eyes on the floor. He had always been a tall man, commanding. His presence used to fill a room before his voice ever did. But, that night, he looked smaller somehow, shoulders curved inward, hands buried in his pockets like a boy waiting to be scolded. In the living room, my younger sister, Alina, was crying. Not loudly, not hysterically, just enough to be believed. Her sobs came in soft, practiced intervals, a fragile sound, the kind that makes people move closer, not question deeper. She sat curled into the corner of the couch, her pale sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, dark hair falling forward to shadow her face. "She's scared," my mother whispered. "You know how sensitive she is." Sensitive. That word had shaped my entire life. Sensitive meant Alina didn't have to apologize. Sensitive meant I had to be stronger. Sensitive meant if something broke, I probably did it. I glanced toward her. For just a second, our eyes met, and there it was. Not fear, not sadness, anticipation. Her hands trembled, but not from distress, from tension, like someone waiting to see if a plan has worked. "She said you pushed her," my father added quietly. The accusation hung in the air like humidity before a storm. I replayed the moment in my head, the argument, the raised voices, the shattered picture frame when she knocked into the hallway table. She had stumbled, but I hadn't touched her. "I didn't," I said. My voice sounded distant, even to me. But this wasn't about what happened. It was about who they believed, and they had already chosen. A clock ticked somewhere behind me. Slow, deliberate, echoing louder than usual. I had grown up in this house, learned to walk on these wooden floors, studied at the dining table beneath the same chandelier now casting a sterile yellow light across the walls, and suddenly, it wasn't mine. "You need to give her space," my mother continued, finally meeting my eyes. Not with anger, but with resolve, until things calm down. Things, that vague, shapeless word that meant everything and nothing, my father cleared his throat. "It's better if you stay somewhere else for a while." For a while, temporary words that carried permanent weight. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry. Not here, not now. Crying would only confirm what they already believed, that I was emotional, unstable, capable of something reckless. Alina sniffled again. Perfect timing. I looked at her one more time. She didn't meet my eyes this time. She stared at her lap, shoulders shaking just enough to maintain the illusion. And that's when something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't panic. This wasn't confusion. This was strategy. I bent down slowly and picked up my suitcase. The zipper rattled in the quiet hallway. My movement made my mother inhale sharply, as if she hadn't expected me to comply so easily. "Call us when you've figured things out," she said. Figured what out? How to prove innocence in a house that had already convicted me? I walked toward the front door. Each step felt louder than it should have. The wooden boards creaked beneath my weight. Familiar sounds that now felt accusatory. When my hand touched the doorknob, I hesitated. For just a second, I thought my father might stop me. That he would finally look up and say, "Wait, let's talk about this." He didn't. The door opened with a soft sigh, letting in the damp scent of wet asphalt and cold night air. Rain kissed my cheeks instantly, blending with the warmth I refused to let fall from my eyes. "Don't come back," my mother repeated. Quieter this time, not shouted, not angry, just decided. The door clicked shut behind me, not slammed, not dramatic, just final. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the glowing windows of the only home I had ever known. Shadows moved behind the curtains, life continuing, adjusting without me. The rain soaked through my sweater within seconds. My suitcase wheels caught on the uneven pavement as I dragged it down the driveway. I didn't look back again, because if I did, I wasn't sure I'd keep walking. Halfway down the street, my phone buzzed. For a heartbeat, hope flared. Maybe they changed their minds. Maybe it wasn't them, it was Alina. One text. Please don't make this harder. Harder. I stared at the screen, rainwater blurring the words. Harder for who? For her? For them? Or for the truth she was hiding? A memory flickered in my mind. Earlier that week, the way she had panicked when our father mentioned the missing documents. From his safe, the way her voice cracked when he said he might report it. The safe, the documents, the fear. This wasn't about a push in the hallway. This was about something else, something bigger, and somehow I had become the easiest solution. Car passed, splashing water against my legs. I barely flinched. One day, I told myself, one day they'll regret this. Not because I would beg for forgiveness, not because I would prove them wrong, but because the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it doesn't knock politely, I disappeared into the rain-soaked street, the house behind me glowing like a distant memory. I didn't know how long exile would last. I didn't know how deeply this lie would root itself into our family, and I definitely didn't know that. Years later, on the happiest day of my life, that same door would finally open again, but not quietly. Alina had always been fragile, at least, that's what they said. The word followed her through childhood like a soft blanket wrapped too tightly around her shoulders, fragile, delicate, sensitive, as if the world itself had been warned to handle her carefully. And because of that warning, everyone else had to adjust their weight, their tone, their expectations. When she broke a vase at 8 years old, the porcelain shattering across the kitchen tiles like fallen snow, my mother rushed to her side as if she had been the one injured. She's overwhelmed, Mom whispered, stroking Alina's hair while the broom waited untouched in the corner. You know how she gets. I was the one who cleaned it up. When I broke a plate at 10, it wasn't overwhelm. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't an accident shaped by emotion. It was carelessness. The word landed heavy, final. When she cried, the house shifted around her. Lights dimmed, voices softened, plans were canceled. When I cried, my father would cross his arms and say, "You're the older one. Be strong." Strength became my assignment. Fragility became her shield, and shields can hide many things. The lie she told that night, the one that pushed me out into the rain, wasn't her first, but it was her boldest. And like all bold lies, it was built on smaller rehearsals. 3 weeks before I was forced out, my father's safe had gone missing. It wasn't the safe itself, it was what had been inside. Important property documents, copies of IDs, a thick envelope of emergency cash. My father kept it in his study behind a painting of a quiet lake, a place he liked to say represented peace. That peace vanished overnight. I remember the morning clearly. The sky outside was pale gray, sunlight struggling to break through thin clouds. My father's voice echoed down the hallway, sharp, controlled, but vibrating underneath. Where is it? Drawers opened, closed, papers shuffled. My mother's footsteps moved quickly from room to room. The air inside the house felt thinner, like oxygen had been replaced with suspicion. Alina stood near the staircase, hands clasped together, watching. Her face wore confusion like makeup. Too perfect, too prepared. I saw someone near the study last night, she said eventually, her voice trembling just enough. The room went still. My father looked at her. Who? She hesitated. That hesitation was masterful. It created gravity, pulled attention, built tension. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe I'm wrong, but she wasn't wrong. She was precise. She didn't accuse me directly. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. My mother filled in the blanks. She was home late, Mom said slowly, her eyes drifting toward me. You were near the study, weren't you? I had walked past it. That was true. I had grabbed a charger from the hallway. Table. Ordinary movements. Harmless. But suddenly, ordinary became suspicious. At dinner that night, silence replaced conversation. The clink of forks against plates sounded louder than usual. My father wouldn't pass the salt into my hand. He placed it on the table instead, sliding it across like an object that shouldn't be touched twice. Small gestures, quiet punishments. Trust doesn't explode, it evaporates, and I could feel it disappearing. But here's what no one knew. I had already suspected something. Alina had changed weeks before the safe incident. She spent longer in her room, whispered on the phone, closed her laptop quickly when someone entered. She flinched at the sound of notifications, as if each vibration carried a threat. One afternoon, I had walked past her door and heard a man's voice through the crack. Low, controlled, persuasive. You understand what happens if your father finds out, the voice had said. There had been silence, then a quiet, shaky, I know. I froze in the hallway. When she opened the door later, her eyes were red. Not from crying, from pressure. Who were you talking to? I asked casually. No one. She replied too quickly. Fragile. That was the word they used. But fragile people don't calculate. Fragile people don't rehearse. Fragile people don't glance toward the study every time our father mentions documents. She wasn't fragile. She was afraid, and fear makes people creative. A week after the safe incident, I found her in the kitchen late at night. The house was dark except for the refrigerator light casting a cold glow across her face. She was holding her phone tightly, her knuckles pale. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She jumped. "Stop sneaking up on me," she snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard her. Then she softened instantly. Performance resetting. I'm stressed." "About what?" I wanted to ask. I almost did, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't guilt. It was dread. The kind of dread that doesn't come from being caught. The kind that comes from being controlled. And that realization unsettled me more than the accusation itself. Because if she had taken the documents, if she had lied, then she wasn't just protecting herself from punishment. She was protecting something bigger, or someone. The house grew colder in those weeks. My father installed a new lock on his study. My mother began asking casual questions disguised as conversation. "You're not hiding anything, right?" she asked me once while folding laundry. The question was light, but her grip on the fabric was tight. I shook my head. She studied my face for signs of deception. I gave her none. But Alina, she avoided those moments entirely. She would suddenly remember homework, a headache, a reason to leave. And still, they chose to believe her, because belief had never been about evidence. It had always been about identity. She was the delicate one. I was the strong one, and strong people don't get the benefit of doubt. The night she finally accused me of pushing her, it felt less like an eruption, and more like the final piece sliding into place. She needed a distraction, a villain, a removal, and I was convenient. But as I packed my suitcase that night, folding clothes with steady hands while my chest burned with betrayal, one thought refused to leave me. If she was willing to destroy me to protect her secret, then that secret must be powerful enough to destroy her. And secrets like that don't stay buried forever. The first year away was brutal. Not dramatic, not cinematic, not the kind of suffering that earns sympathy in public. Just slow, quiet, grinding. I rented a single room above a bakery on the edge of downtown, the kind of place people walked past without noticing. The staircase creaked with every step, and the hallway smelled permanently of burnt sugar and yeast. Sweet at first, then suffocating if you stayed too long. My room had one window. It faced a brick wall. In the mornings, the ovens downstairs roared to life before sunrise. Metal trays clanged. Dough slapped against steel tables. The smell of caramelized crust seeped through the floorboards and clung to my clothes like a second skin. I worked double shifts at a cafe 3 blocks away. Mornings started at 6. Apron tied tight. Smile practiced in the bathroom mirror before stepping out. Large latte. Extra foam. No sugar. My hands cracked from detergent and steam. Tiny cuts formed along my knuckles from washing mugs too quickly. The sting reminded me I was still here, still surviving. My pride cracked faster. Sometimes, during the slow hours between lunch and evening rush, I would stare at the cafe door every time it opened. Not because I expected customers, because a small, irrational part of me imagined my mother walking in, or my father, or even Alina, but no one came. At night, back in that dim rented room, I would sit on the edge of the narrow bed and hold my phone. The screen felt heavier than it should have. Sometimes I dialed my mother's number. I'd listen to the first ring, sometimes the second, then I'd hang up. What would I even say? Hi, I'm still innocent. Hi, do you miss me? Hi, does she still cry when she lies? No one called me. Weeks passed, then months. Silence can be louder than shouting, except once. It was late October, cold enough that my breath fogged the air when I walked home from work. The bakery had already closed. The downstairs lights were off. My room was dark except for the faint flicker of a street lamp slipping through the curtains. My phone rang. Her name filled the screen. Alina. For a moment I just stared at it. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't expected. Anger mixed with something softer, something I didn't want to admit. I answered. There was no greeting, just breathing. Fast, uneven, like she had been running. You need to stay away, she whispered. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, stripped of its usual softness. From what? I asked, sitting upright on the bed. My fingers curled around the phone so tightly they trembled. Silence. Then I heard something else. A car door slamming in the distance. Muffled voices. A man's tone. Sharp. Impatient. Alina, I said, quieter now. What's going on? Her breathing grew sharper. Just don't come back. Not yet. Not yet. The words lodged in my chest. Are you in trouble? I pressed. A pause. Then, almost too faint to hear. I didn't mean for it to go this far. My heart began to pound, a deep rhythmic thud that echoed in my ears. "What didn't you mean?" I asked. The line crackled. I thought I heard her say my name. Then, the call disconnected. I stared at the blank screen. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. The fluorescent light in the kitchen flickered once, twice, then steadied again. The hum of the refrigerator filled. The silence. Stay away. From what? I stood up and began pacing. The wooden floor creaked beneath my steps. Every sound felt amplified. This wasn't guilt calling. This wasn't apology. This was fear, and not the kind she used at home, soft and curated. This was real. A memory surfaced. The man's voice I had overheard outside her bedroom weeks before I was forced out. "You understand what happens if your father finds out?" Her whispered response. "I know." Finds out what? My mind began connecting pieces I hadn't wanted to examine. The missing safe, the documents, the cash. What if she hadn't stolen them for herself? What if someone else needed them? Or demanded them? The next morning, I skipped my shift. I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my apartment, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I searched local news, financial investigations, fraud cases, anything recent, nothing obvious, but fear leaves traces. By noon, I found a small article buried 3 pages deep on a local business forum. A man under investigation for forged property transfers, identity fraud, manipulated legal documents. The name hit me like cold water. I recognized it. He had come to our house once. I remembered the way he smiled too long, the way his handshake lingered when he greeted my father. He had called himself a consultant. I remembered Alina avoiding eye contact that evening. My stomach tightened. Was she involved or trapped? The possibilities twisted inside me. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound outside the building made me flinch. A car slowing down, footsteps on gravel, the distant bark of a dog. I kept replaying her voice. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Far how? Far enough to exile me? Far enough to destroy trust? Or far enough to become dangerous? Days passed without another call. I tried calling her. Back once. Straight to voicemail. I left no message. At work, I dropped a tray for the first time. Ceramic shattered across the cafe floor. The crash silenced the room. "I'm sorry," I murmured automatically, kneeling to pick up the pieces. The manager sighed. "You need to focus. Focus." I wanted to laugh, because suddenly this wasn't just sibling rivalry. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't favoritism. It was something layered, calculated, threatening, and whatever she was tangled in, it had teeth. That night, as I locked my apartment door and leaned against it, breathing slowly, a new realization settled in. If she was warning me to stay away, then someone knew where I was. And if someone knew where I was, then exile hadn't protected me. It had only delayed something. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just slightly. Across the street, under the dim streetlight, a car sat idling, headlights off, engine running, waiting. And for the first time since I left home, I wondered if being cast out wasn't the worst thing that had happened. Maybe it was only the beginning. 3 years passed before the truth began to surface, not in a dramatic confession, not in a tearful apology, but in a quiet university library, under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant machinery, while rain tapped softly against tall glass windows. By then, I had rebuilt something resembling stability. I had clawed my way back into school. Night classes at first, then full enrollment. It wasn't glamorous. I studied between work shifts, highlighted textbooks during bus rides, and drank more coffee than water. My life was structured, disciplined, predictable. Predictable felt safe. That evening, the campus was nearly empty. It was close to midnight. The library smelled faintly of old paper and industrial cleaner. Rows of wooden desks stretched beneath dimmed ceiling lights, casting long shadows across the floor. I was researching for a finance ethics assignment. The irony didn't escape me. Fraud detection, financial misconduct, legal loopholes. My laptop screen glowed pale blue in the darkness. My eyes burned from hours of reading, but I kept scrolling through case studies, annotating paragraphs, underlining phrases like forged documentation and unauthorized asset transfers. And then I saw it. A familiar name in a small investigative report. At first, it didn't register. My brain skimmed over it like any other string of letters. Then it hit, hard. The air seemed to thin around me. I leaned closer to the screen. A local financial scam. Forged property documents. Hidden transfers under multiple family accounts, under investigation. And there it was. The same man who used to tutor Alina. The same man who visited our house on quiet afternoons when my parents were at work. The same polished shoes by the front door. the same artificial smile that never quite reached his eyes. I remembered the first time I saw him. He had shaken my father's hand firmly, just helping Alina prepare for her business entrance exams, he'd said smoothly, but his gaze had lingered too long when scanning the hallway, measuring, calculating. I remembered how Alina's posture changed when he arrived, shoulders tightening, fingers twisting into the hem of her sweater. I remembered the way she flinched when his car pulled into the driveway. At the time, I thought it was teenage nerves. Now, staring at that article, something darker formed in my chest. I scrolled further. Authorities suspected the man had manipulated young clients into signing documents they didn't fully understand. Accessed family financial information. Leveraged trust to orchestrate complex fraud. My heartbeat quickened. I saw the phrase, family property deeds, in bold, the safe, the missing documents. Suddenly, everything aligned like pieces of a puzzle, snapping violently into place. Alina hadn't framed me for jealousy. She framed me to protect someone, or to protect herself. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. My fingers felt cold despite the heated room. Flashbacks flickered like fragmented film reels, the late night whispering through her bedroom door, the panic in her eyes when our father mentioned reporting the missing safe, the trembling hands during that final confrontation. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she had said on the phone. Far enough to implicate me, far enough to exile me. But maybe she hadn't been protecting a secret for pride. Maybe she had been protecting herself from exposure, or from retaliation. The library door opened somewhere, behind me. The sound made me jump. My pulse hammered against my ribs. A student entered quietly, unaware that my entire understanding of the past was collapsing. I returned my eyes to the screen. The article mentioned coercion, psychological manipulation, threats disguised as mentorship. My throat tightened. Had he pressured her? Blackmailed her? Was the safe stolen under instruction? If she had given him access to our home's documents, even unknowingly, then blaming me would have redirected suspicion away from the true source. I thought back to that dinner table, the forks scraping against plates, my father refusing to meet my eyes, my mother's carefully neutral tone. Trust evaporated that night, but maybe Alina's trust had been weaponized long before mine was destroyed. Felt anger rise, sharp and immediate. 3 years of silence, 3 years of struggle. 3 years of carrying a stain that wasn't mine. She could have told me. She could have confessed. But then another emotion followed closely behind. Fear. If she had been manipulated into fraud, if her name was tied to this investigation, then she wasn't just guilty. She was vulnerable. And if this man was under investigation now, that meant authorities were digging into financial records, family records, property records. My family. My phone buzzed suddenly on the desk, vibrating against the wood. I nearly knocked over my coffee. Unknown number. I stared at it, heart racing. It rang once, twice, then stopped. A message notification followed, no text preview. Just a blank message icon. My hands trembled as I opened it. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a single sentence. They're asking questions, no name attached. But I knew. Alina, I typed back immediately. About what? The typing indicator appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her response. About the documents. My stomach dropped. This wasn't ancient history resurfacing by coincidence. This was active, present, dangerous. Tell them the truth, I typed. 3 dots appeared again. Longer this time. I can't. The words felt heavier than any accusation she had ever made. I looked around the nearly empty library. The security guard at the front desk glanced lazily at a monitor. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. For the first time in 3 years, I felt pulled back toward that house, toward the rain, toward the door that had closed. If investigators were involved now, then secrets were unraveling. And when secrets unravel, they don't ask permission about who gets hurt in the process. My phone buzzed again. A final message. He knows you're in the city. My breath caught. He, the man from the article, the man under investigation, the man who had once sat at our kitchen table smiling. A cold realization settled into my bones. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This wasn't just about family betrayal. It was about survival. Because if he knew where I was, then my exile had never truly ended. And if the truth was surfacing now, it might drag all of us down with it. 6 years after that rainy night, I received an envelope. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, slipped through the mail slot of the townhouse Daniel and I had just finished renovating. The sound it made, a soft, deliberate slide against hardwood, shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. I was in the kitchen when it fell. Sunlight streamed through wide glass windows, illuminating dust particles suspended in warm air. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint and brewed coffee. Outside, A delivery truck rumbled past, ordinary and unthreatening. Inside, my pulse quickened. For no reason I could explain, the envelope was ivory. Thick paper, gold lettering pressed into the flap. Not printed, embossed. Intentional. My name, handwritten. I didn't need to see the signature to recognize the careful curves of the letters. My mother's handwriting had always been precise, balanced, controlled. For a moment, I simply stood there, staring. 6 years. 6 years of silence punctuated only by brief, cautious exchanges, the occasional holiday message, stiff and distant. After the investigation had surfaced, after authorities questioned the man who had manipulated Alina, after the truth finally untangled enough to clear my name quietly but without spectacle, there had still been no full apology, only awareness, and awareness is not the same as accountability. I opened the envelope slowly. The paper made a faint tear as it separated, a sound that felt louder than it should have. Inside was a single card. No decorative flourish, no sentimental language, just a short note. We would like to attend your wedding. If you'll allow us. No apology, no explanation, just attendance. The simplicity of it tightened something in my chest. Not anger, that had dulled with time. Not sadness, that had been processed, compartmentalized. It was something else. Expectation. Daniel walked into the kitchen just as I lowered the card. He was still wearing his work blazer, sleeves pushed slightly up his forearms. His expression shifted the moment he saw my face. "What is it?" he asked gently. I handed him the card without speaking. He read it once. Then again, his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "You don't owe them anything," he said, stepping closer. His hand found mine automatically, warm and steady. "Not your forgiveness, not a seat at the ceremony." His thumb brushed over my knuckles, grounding, and he was right. The girl who had stood in the rain with a suitcase had once imagined this moment differently. She had imagined a dramatic apology, tears, a confession delivered on trembling knees. But life rarely offers theatrical closure. It offers quiet invitations and quiet decisions. I walked to the window and looked out at our small backyard. The oak tree we had planted 2 years ago was taller now, branches stretching confidently toward the sky. Beneath it sat a wooden bench Daniel built himself, sanding each corner smooth. This was my life now, built deliberately, brick by brick. I wasn't the broken girl who had been cast out. I had built something, a degree framed in the hallway, a career I had earned without shortcuts, a partner who chose me every day without hesitation. I had built stability, I had built safety, and maybe I had built enough strength to face them without shaking. "Let them come," I said quietly. Daniel studied me, searching for doubt. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded slowly. Yes, because this wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about standing in my truth without fear. I wanted them to see it, the woman I had become, the life I had constructed from the pieces they once discarded. The wedding venue overlooked the ocean, a stretch of glass and white stone perched on a cliffside, waves crashing rhythmically below. When I first visited it, I felt something settle inside me, a sense of vastness, of distance from the past. Now, holding the invitation response in my hand days later, I couldn't ignore the quiet unease threading through my excitement. Their confirmation arrived promptly. 3 names, no additional note, no explanation. But the weight of their presence loomed larger than the guest count suggested. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I found myself thinking about them more than I expected. Late at night, as Daniel slept beside me, I would stare at the ceiling and replay old memories. My father teaching me to ride a bike, my mother braiding my hair, before school. Alina's laughter when we were younger, before secrets hardened her expression. Memory is complicated. It softens the edges of pain, but it doesn't erase it. One evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Pause. Then my mother's voice. Older, quieter. "We received the details," she said. "Thank you." Her tone was careful, measured, as if every word had been rehearsed. "You're welcome," I replied. Another pause. "I hope this is a happy time for you." "It is," I said honestly. I waited for more, for something deeper, but she didn't offer it. "We'll see you soon," she said. Soon. The word carried layers. After the call ended, I stood in the darkened living room, the ocean visible in the distance through sliding doors. The tide was high that night, waves crashing harder than usual. Daniel joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. "You okay?" he murmured. I leaned back into him. "They're coming," I said. He kissed the side of my head. "Then we'll be ready." But readiness doesn't eliminate uncertainty, because what I didn't know, what I couldn't see, was that their decision to attend wasn't only about witnessing my happiness. It wasn't just about reconciliation. They were coming with something unresolved, something heavy, and secrets, even buried for years, have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moment. 3 days before the ceremony, an email arrived in my inbox. No subject line, no signature, just a single attachment. And beneath it, one sentence: "You deserve to know before they arrive." My hands hovered over the trackpad. The ocean outside was calm, too calm. And suddenly, the wedding didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a collision waiting to happen. The venue overlooked the ocean. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through towering glass walls, spilling gold across polished wood floors and cascading over arrangements of white roses. The waves below crashed softly against the cliffs, rhythmic, patient, almost ceremonial. Guests laughed, crystal glasses clinked, silk dresses whispered against tailored suits. From a distance, it looked like perfection. And then I saw them. My parents stood near the back of the terrace, just beyond the archway of roses. They looked older than I remembered, smaller, as if the years had finally settled onto their shoulders like a quiet punishment. My father's once rigid posture had softened. My mother's eyes, always sharp and calculating, now darted around the room like a woman searching for exits. Between them stood Alina, my sister. She avoided my eyes at first, her chin tilted slightly downward, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. But when our gazes accidentally locked across the sea of guests, I saw it. Fear, not resentment, not pride, not even guilt. Fear. And suddenly, the ocean didn't sound so peaceful anymore. Daniel squeezed my hand at the altar. His thumb brushed gently against my knuckles, grounding me. "You okay?" he whispered, smiling for the guests but searching my face for truth. I nodded, but I wasn't, because Alina wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of something else. The ceremony began. The officiant's voice carried smoothly across the terrace, blending with the distant wind. Vows about loyalty, trust, forever, forever. A word that once felt like a promise. Now it felt like a question. As Daniel spoke, his voice steady and warm, I glanced past the rows of seated guests. Alina sat in the dal, third row directly centered. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Her shoulders trembled, not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but just enough for someone who knew her to understand. She was counting seconds, waiting. For what? Flashback. 6 years ago, rain hammered against the roof of my childhood home. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as my father's voice thundered through the house. "She's lying," he had said. Alina stood beside him, silent tears streaming down her face. The accusation had destroyed everything. Money missing from my father's company, documents leaked, a scandal that nearly sent him to prison, and somehow it had traced back to me, my laptop, my access code, my name. I swore I was innocent. I begged, but my mother didn't look at me that night. And Alina, she never defended me. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry," as security escorted me out of the house I grew up in. Exile doesn't always come with screaming. Sometimes it comes quietly. Signed papers, closed doors, blocked numbers. That was the last night I saw them, until now. "Do you, Daniel?" The officiant's voice pulled me back to the present. Daniel's vows were steady, unwavering. Every word felt intentional. He chose me, not because of my past, not despite it, but with full knowledge of it. He had met me at my lowest, working 2 jobs, rebuilding my life from scratch, carrying shame that wasn't mine, and he never once asked me to prove myself. When it was my turn to speak, my voice didn't shake, but inside, a storm gathered, because Alina was still trembling. And now, she kept checking her phone, subtle, quick glances, a vibration, a flicker of panic across her face. My father leaned slightly toward her, whispered something. Her lips formed one word: soon, soon. The air shifted. As applause erupted and Daniel kissed me, cheers rose into the sky. Rose petals drifted, like soft snowfall. Cameras flashed. Music swelled. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. But in the corner of my vision, I saw Alina stand abruptly. She stepped out of the row. Her heels clicked sharply against the wood floor as she moved toward the interior hallway. Too fast. Too urgent. My mother hesitated, then followed. My father stayed seated, frozen, watching me, not with anger, with dread. The reception began, inside the glass hall. Candlelight flickered across smiling faces. Laughter returned. Champagne poured endlessly. Daniel was pulled into conversation with relatives. I excused myself quietly. The hallway leading toward the bridal suite was dimmer. The music softened into a distant hum. Halfway down, I heard it. Voices. Low. Tense. You said it wouldn't reach her, my mother whispered sharply. It wasn't supposed to, Alina replied, her voice cracking. I handled it. Handled, my mother snapped. They're here. My breath stopped. They? A pause. Then Alina said something that made the air leave my lungs. He wants to tell her himself. Silence followed. Heavy. Suffocating. I stepped closer, heels silent against carpet. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they would hear it. Dad can't survive another investigation, my mother continued. If she finds out, she deserves to know, Alina interrupted, suddenly fierce. It was never her. It was him. And now they have proof. Proof. My mind reeled. The night I was cast out. The missing money. The silence. Not me. Him, my father. Sharp inhale escaped my lips before I could stop it. Both women turned. Their eyes met mine. And in that instant, every unspoken truth between us ignited. Alina stepped forward slowly. I was trying to protect you, she whispered. By letting them destroy me? My voice was steady. Too steady. Tears welled in her eyes. He said if I didn't back his story, he'd ruin you worse. Criminal charges. Prison. I thought exile was the lesser evil. The hallway felt smaller. The walls closer. Is it true? I asked. Behind them, at the far end of the corridor, I saw movement. A man in a dark suit stepped into view. Unfamiliar. Cold-eyed. Holding a leather folder. He stopped when he saw me. Then he nodded slightly. Respectfully. My name is Carter, he said calmly. I represent the board. There's been a reopening of the case. The ocean roared outside as if on cue. Wind rattled the glass panels. My wedding day, the day truth decided to arrive. Alina's hands shook violently now. I couldn't let you marry him without knowing, she said. Without clearing your name. Down the hall, I saw my father appear. His face drained of color as he noticed Carter. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated. For the first time in my life. Small. Daniel's voice echoed faintly from the ballroom, calling my name. Concerned. Searching. 2 lives stood before me. The one built on survival. And the one about to be rewritten by truth. I stepped forward. Not toward my parents. Not toward fear. But toward the man holding the proof. Tell me everything, I said. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the ocean into shadows, I realized something extraordinary. This wedding was never the end of a love story. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and someone was finally going to confess. It happened during the speeches. Crystal chandeliers glowed above us, refracting, soft amber light across linen-covered tables and half-finished champagne flutes. The ocean beyond the glass walls had turned ink-dark, waves crashing harder now, as if the tide itself sensed something shifting inside the hall. Laughter faded as my father slowly rose from his seat. The scrape of his chair against polished wood sounded louder than it should have. Deliberate. Final. He cleared his throat. The room quieted. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations dissolved into murmurs, then into silence. Even the string quartet faltered, their bows hovering uncertainly above the strings. Daniel's hand found mine beneath the table. Warm. Steady. I made a mistake, my father began. His voice was not the commanding baritone I remembered from boardrooms and childhood reprimands. It trembled at the edges, like an old structure straining under weight. My mother's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve. Her manicured nails pressed sharply into the fabric of his jacket. A silent warning. My pulse thundered in my ears. Years of silence balanced on his next words. I believed the wrong daughter. The words landed like shattered glass. Gasps. Subtle. Sharp. Someone dropped a spoon. It clattered against porcelain and echoed unnaturally long. Across the room, Alina's face drained of color. The carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the way her lips parted. Stunned, or terrified. I know the truth now, my father continued, swallowing hard, and she deserves to hear it. The room felt too small, too hot, air seemed to vanish, and for a split second, I wasn't at my wedding reception anymore. I was 22 again, standing in our family kitchen while my father accused me of betrayal. I could still smell the rain that night, still feel the weight of disbelief pressing against my ribs. She hacked the accounts, he had told the board back then. She had access. I remember turning to Alina, waiting, begging silently, but she had looked down, and I had lost everything. Now, years later, he stood beneath crystal chandeliers instead of kitchen lights. But the verdict still hung in the air. Daniel squeezed my hand tighter. Whatever this is, he whispered, you don't face it alone. But this was older than our love. This was blood. My father exhaled slowly. His eyes met mine. Not with authority, with regret. The investigation was reopened, he said. Evidence surfaced. The financial breach, the missing funds. It wasn't her. The word her trembled. A ripple moved through the guests like wind across tall grass. It was, no. The interruption was barely louder than a breath, but it cut through the room like a blade. Alina stood, her chair tipped backward slightly before she steadied it. Her hands shook visibly now, fingers curling into fists at her sides. "No," she repeated, stronger this time. Every head turned toward her. My mother rose halfway from her seat. "Alina, sit down." But Alina didn't move. Her eyes found mine, and in them, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not guilt, resolve. "You don't get to do this," she said to our father, voice cracking but unwavering. "Not like this." The silence deepened. My father's jaw tightened. "It's time." "Time?" Alina let out a brittle laugh. "You think standing up at her wedding and confessing makes you noble?" Confessing. The word detonated inside my chest. Guests shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged whispers. Phones subtly lifted. Discreet, but recording. Daniel stood now too, positioning himself slightly in front of me without making it obvious. Protective, calm, but ready. Alina stepped into the aisle between tables. Her heels clicked sharply, echoing with each step as she moved closer to the center of the room. "You want the truth?" she said, turning slowly so her voice carried to everyone. "Fine." My mother's face went pale. "Alina, stop." But she didn't. 6 years ago, after the board discovered irregularities in company accounts, suspicion had fallen on me. My login credentials, my laptop, my digital signature. But what no one knew was that I had shared my password with her. "For the internship," Alina said, her voice now trembling under the weight of memory. "I needed access. You said it was temporary." She looked at me. "You trusted me." A sharp ache pierced through my chest. I remembered. Late nights, coffee, me helping her prepare for a future in the same company. "I didn't steal anything," she said quickly, "but I left the system open, and someone else used it." All eyes turned back to my father. His face hardened, not in denial, but in exposure. "You were covering losses," Alina continued, "risky investments that failed. You needed someone to blame before the board dug deeper." Murmurs grew louder. "You told me if I spoke up," she said, her voice breaking now, "you'd destroy her completely. Press charges. Make it criminal. You said exile was mercy." Mercy. The same word he had used the night I was escorted out. My father closed his eyes briefly. "A man cornered not by accusation, but by truth. I thought I could fix it," he said hoarsely. "I thought I could repay it before anyone noticed. And when you couldn't, I finally spoke." My voice surprised even me. Calm. Controlled. "You let them bury me." The words hung between us. He nodded. "Once. Yes." The admission shattered something invisible but immense. My mother sank slowly into her chair as if gravity had suddenly increased. She looked not at him, but at me. And for the first time in years, there was no calculation in her gaze. Only shame. "I believed him," she whispered faintly. "I chose him." The ocean crashed violently against the cliffs outside, rattling the glass panels. Wind howled briefly through the seams of the building, nature itself bearing witness. Alina turned toward me fully now. Tears streamed freely down her face. "I should have fought harder," she said. "I was scared. I thought I was protecting you from something worse. And instead," I replied softly, "you let me disappear." Her shoulders collapsed inward. Daniel stepped beside me, not shielding me now, but standing equal. "What happens next?" he asked quietly. Not to my father, to me. Because this wasn't about exposure anymore. It was about choice. The room waited. Careers could crumble tonight. Reputations would fracture by morning. Headlines would follow. Lawsuits, consequences. But none of that compared to the silence that had lived in me for 6 years. I looked at my father, at the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who once called me his pride, and then I looked at Alina, the sister who had traded courage for fear. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. My voice echoed in the stillness. "I want the truth documented, publicly, legally, and I want my name cleared." My father nodded slowly, defeated. "It will be." A pause. "And after that?" he asked, almost like a child awaiting punishment. Felt the weight of the moment. "Some endings demand fire, others demand distance. You live with it," I said, the way I had to. No screaming, no dramatic collapse, just consequence. The quartet, uncertain, began to play again. Softly, hesitantly, life attempting to resume its rhythm, but nothing was the same. Because tonight wasn't just about my confession. It was about a fracture finally exposed under bright light. And as guests slowly began to breathe again, as whispers turned into cautious applause for honesty, I realized something profound. My father's speech didn't ruin my wedding. It gave it something stronger than perfection. It gave it truth, and truth changes everything. Her voice cracked. "I lied," she said. Silence slammed into the walls. The chandeliers above us continued to glow, indifferent and golden, but the warmth had drained from the room. The ocean outside roared against the cliffs, wind pressing hard against the glass as if trying to force its way in. Every guest froze. Even the waitstaff stopped mid-step, silver trays trembling slightly in their hands. Alina stood in the center of the reception hall, shoulders shaking. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks in uneven lines. These were not delicate tears. Not the soft, calculated tears she used when she wanted sympathy. These were violent, raw. I was being blackmailed. The words landed heavier than the confession before it. My father's head snapped toward her. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and I felt the ground tilt. The name of the man from the investigation left her lips like poison. Carter wasn't just reopening the case, she whispered hoarsely. He was investigating him. A ripple moved through the guests. That name had already carried tension tonight, but now it carried something darker. He threatened to expose me, to hurt you. I didn't know what to do. Her gaze found mine, desperate and fractured. Flashback. 5 years ago. A charity gala, soft piano music, champagne towers, Alina standing near the balcony with a man I didn't recognize, older, confident, his hand resting too comfortably at the small of her back. I had asked her about him later. He's helping me with connections, she had said dismissively. You worry too much. I remember the way she avoided my eyes then. Now I understood why. Back in the present, her breathing was uneven, shallow. He knew about the company's unstable investments, she continued. He knew Dad was desperate. He said if I didn't help him move documents, if I didn't transfer certain files and delay internal audits, he'd leak everything. Not just about Dad, about me. My father staggered back a step as if physically struck. What did you do? He asked, his voice barely audible. Alina squeezed her eyes shut. I took the documents. I hid transactions. I rerouted funds temporarily. Gasps. Louder this time. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. One violinist slowly lowered her instrument, eyes wide, and when the board started asking questions, Alina said, voice splintering, he told me to let suspicion fall on her. She pointed at me with a trembling hand. He said you were already trusted, that no one would think I'd betray the family. I felt Daniel's fingers tighten around mine, not to silence me, to anchor me. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out, Alina said. I thought I could move the money back, restore everything, make it disappear. Her laugh broke mid-sound, hollow, but he kept asking for more access, more leverage, and every time I hesitated he'd send me proof that he was watching, screenshots, messages, photos of you leaving work. A cold wave washed over me. He threatened to hurt you, she said directly to me now. Not financially, physically. The room seemed to shrink inward, and so you chose to destroy me instead, I replied quietly. She didn't argue. She nodded. Yes. There it was, the clean cut of truth. I let them believe it was you, she continued, tears streaming without restraint. I cried in front of them. I said I saw you stressed. I said maybe you made a mistake. I told them I was scared of what you'd become. Each sentence felt like a blade sliding between ribs. I thought exile would protect you, she whispered. I thought if you were gone, he'd lose interest. Flashback. The night I was escorted out, Alina hugging me tightly. At the door, her body shaking. I'm sorry, she had murmured into my shoulder. I thought it was guilt for not defending me. Now I realized it was guilt for orchestrating it. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Chairs creaked. Someone near the back quietly excused themselves. This was supposed to be a wedding. Instead, it was a reckoning. Daniel stepped forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. Where is he now? Alina swallowed hard. Under investigation. Carter's building a case. That's why Dad found out the full truth. That's why this reopened. My father's face looked older than it had an hour ago. The powerful executive persona had evaporated. What remained was a man who had trusted fear over fairness. You let me believe my own daughter betrayed me, he said weakly. Alina's voice rose suddenly, sharp with buried resentment. You were already looking for someone to blame. The accusation hung thick in the air. You didn't want to admit you'd mismanaged the investments. You needed a distraction. I just gave you one. My mother's shoulders sagged. We failed both of you. The wind outside howled again, rattling the glass. A storm was building offshore. Inside, another storm had already arrived. I looked at Alina, really looked at her, not as the villain of my story, not as the sister who ruined me, but as someone who had made a series of desperate, catastrophic choices. Fear, layered over fear, blackmail layered over ego, secrets layered over silence. And you never told me, I said softly. I couldn't, she replied immediately. If you knew, you would have confronted him. You would have fought back, and he would have escalated. A tear slid down my own cheek before I realized it. Not from anger, from exhaustion. Years of rebuilding my life. Years of believing I had been fundamentally unworthy. All built on her silence. I lost everything, I said. Friends, my career, my home. I know. Her voice broke completely now. And I've been losing myself ever since. The room was suffocatingly still. No one recorded now. No one whispered. They were witnessing something far more intimate than scandal. They were witnessing consequence. Daniel leaned close to my ear. You decide what happens next. Choice. For years I hadn't been given one. Now it stood before me. The storm outside cracked with distant thunder. A flash of lightning illuminated the ocean through the glass. For a brief second, everything inside the hall glowed stark and white. Every tear, every flinch, every regret fully exposed. This doesn't erase what you did, I said carefully. Alina nodded. But it explains it. Her breath hitched. I don't forgive you, I continued. Not tonight. She closed her eyes as if bracing for impact. But I won't let his manipulation define the rest of my life either. My father straightened slightly, confused. What does that mean? It means, I said, my voice steadying, the legal process moves forward. His crimes, your mismanagement, everything, transparently. And us? My mother whispered. I looked at them. The family that fractured under pressure, under pride, under fear. Us, I said slowly, will take time, and honesty, and boundaries. Alina stepped back as if absorbing the weight of that word. Boundaries. The quartet hesitantly resumed playing, soft, uncertain notes filling the shattered silence, life attempting to stitch itself back together, but it would never be the same shape again. And as thunder rolled across the horizon, as guests slowly returned to their seats, shaken but silent, I realized something profound. This wasn't the moment my sister destroyed me. That had happened years ago. This was the moment she stopped hiding. And sometimes, the truth burns everything, down before it finally sets you free. Everyone watched me. The chandeliers above glinted like cold eyes, reflecting gold across polished wood floors. Every guest in the room sat stiffly, glasses half raised, the hum of soft conversation dying as if someone had pressed pause on the world, waiting for anger, for revenge, for humiliation. I felt it all. The years of exile, the nights spent alone in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper and a fridge that never fully cooled, the loneliness, the unanswered calls, the emails ignored, the texts that never received a reply, every moment of doubt, every silent accusation lodged in my parents' eyes. They had built a fortress around me with walls of disbelief, and tonight, they were all leaning in to watch me crumble, or retaliate. But I also saw something else, a broken version of my sister, Alina. She was hunched slightly, shoulders tight as if trying to make herself small, invisible, yet somehow the center of everyone's gaze. Her mascara had run further than anyone else would have noticed, streaking dark rivulets down her cheeks. Her lips quivered, not with defiance, but with raw, unfiltered fear. Every micro-expression screamed a story she had spent years hiding. Story of manipulation, terror, and regret. I stepped forward. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. I could feel the heat of every pair of eyes on me, the collective inhale of curiosity and anticipation. I forgive you, I said quietly. The words slipped out softly, almost impossibly gentle, and yet they struck the room like a thunderclap. Gasps. Not the polite kind reserved for shockers in magazines or tabloids. These were real, sharp, involuntary. Guests leaned forward in disbelief, murmurs flitting like restless shadows across the marble floor. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was freedom. I could feel it coursing through me like fire tempered with ice, calm, unshakable, the kind of power that no one could see but everyone could feel. My chest lifted, my back straightened. I wasn't here to break her. I was here to reclaim myself. But forgiveness didn't erase consequences. Not tonight, not ever. You'll tell the full truth, I added, my voice steady but carrying the weight of everything I had endured. To everyone. No more hiding. No more lies. No more secrets. Alina's hands flew to her face. Sobs tore through her body, harsh and uncontrolled. Her knees shook beneath her dress, the silk bunching around her ankles. I noticed the trembling of her fingers, the way she clutched the edges of the chair behind her, as if the wood could anchor her to reality. She nodded, gasping for air between cries. I let my eyes sweep the room. My parents, years of cold shoulders, and whispered judgments had left lines across their faces that no cream could erase. Their eyes, usually guarded, now glistened with a mix of awe, disbelief, and something they hadn't allowed themselves to feel in years, pride. It was subtle, a fraction of a flicker in my mother's expression, a pause in my father's rigid stance, but it was real. Still, forgiveness doesn't rebuild trust overnight, and I wasn't sure what tomorrow would look like. Flashback. The first call from Alina after my exile. Her voice had trembled on the other end of the line. Stay away, please, from everything. I hadn't known then that fear could look so much like betrayal, that love could be manipulated into deception, that someone could ruin you not out of hate, but out of terror. Now, standing in the same room where I had once imagined myself humiliated in front of family, friends, and strangers, I understood the depth of her desperation. I saw her truth in the micro details, the way her foot tapped the floor, unsteady, the way her shoulders flinched when she glanced toward our parents, the way her hands twisted the folds of her dress. Fear had sculpted her body language, and it had guided her. Decisions, why? I asked, softly. Her voice cracked. I was scared, of losing everything, of him finding out, of you getting hurt. I swallowed hard. Years of imagined betrayal flashed across my mind. The late nights alone, the whispered accusations, the feeling that no one believed me. And here was the truth, stark and ugly, yet human. The room held its breath again. I realized in that moment that empathy was not weakness either. It was strength, because strength did not lie in revenge. Strength lay in clarity, in choosing a path forward unchained by bitterness. I took a step closer to Alina. Her head hung low. Every inch I closed the distance seemed to compress the tension around us. The guest's eyes followed me like slow-moving storms, waiting for disaster. But none came. I know you were scared, I said. And I know you did what you thought you had to. That doesn't make it right, but it does make sense. Her sobs subsided slightly. Her head lifted, but her eyes remained wet, haunted, searching. You're still my sister, I continued. And that doesn't mean you're forgiven completely. It means we can start somewhere, honestly, openly, and we will rebuild, if we choose to. She nodded again, this time with a fragile, glimmering hope. I could see my parents exhale as if releasing decades of tension. My mother's hand reached for my father's, gripping it tight, grounding herself in the moment. The storm outside had quieted. The ocean waves lapped gently against the shore, a distant murmur behind the glass walls. Sunlight had begun to dip, streaking gold across the reception hall, bathing everything in a fleeting sense of serenity. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, letting the words sink in for everyone, guests, family, Alina, and myself. Then I added deliberately, but every choice has consequences. We face them together, and we face them honestly. Alina's shoulders squared slightly. A flicker of relief mixed with lingering guilt crossed her face. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't anticipated the power of compassion delivered with authority. I glanced at Daniel. His eyes met mine, calm, supportive. He had been my anchor through years of betrayal, through nights of despair. His presence reminded me that trust, once broken, could still be rebuilt, with care, patience, and honesty. The guests shifted slightly, unsure how to react. The air still taut but charged with a new energy. They weren't witnessing a collapse. They were witnessing the birth of a reckoning tempered with grace. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness was not surrender. Forgiveness was power, a power to heal, to redefine, to reclaim what had been stolen. Not objects, not wealth, not status, but dignity, voice, and self. The room began to exhale collectively, quiet whispers of relief, tentative nods of approval, and the soft click of heels against the wood floor began to fill the space again. Alina's hands finally released their grip on the chair. She wiped her tears, a slow, trembling motion that spoke of beginnings. I watched her carefully, not as the sister who destroyed me, not as the sister who betrayed me, but as the sister who had been terrified, and finally, in some way, ready to step into the light. And I, standing at the center of that hall, realized something else. The past could not be erased. The scars would remain, but the future, our future, was ours to write. Forgiveness was the first word, and the first step. I stepped back. The guests murmured softly. Alina exhaled, shaky but genuine. My parents' expressions softened. A mixture of relief, pride, and astonishment etched across their faces. The storm had passed, at least for now, and I knew deep down that the real work was only just beginning, because freedom, once granted, was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning, and this time we would walk it together. Later that night, long after the guests had departed and the ocean swallowed the last echoes of applause, I found myself on the balcony wrapped in silence. The world seemed paused. The lights of the venue spilled gold and amber across the polished marble floor behind me, contrasting sharply with the inky black of the waves below. The air was crisp, carrying salt and the faint scent of damp earth from the gardens. Daniel was behind me, gently draping his jacket across my shoulders. The fabric was warm, comforting, a shield against the chill, and perhaps against the weight of everything that had just unfolded. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, careful, carrying the softness that had become my anchor over the years. His hands lingered on my shoulders for just a moment too long, steadying me in the way someone steadies a fragile vase, afraid it might shatter. I drew a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. My mind wandered back to that rainy night, so many years ago. The suitcase, the hallway, the echo of my parents' words in a voice I still remembered with sharp clarity. "Your sister made her choice. Don't come back. They chose wrong once," I murmured softly, my eyes tracing the horizon where the moonlight kissed the crests of the restless ocean. "But tonight, I chose right." Daniel nodded, sensing the layers behind my words, understanding without needing explanation. His hand brushed my arm, gentle reassurance that I wasn't alone in this reckoning, that someone had finally witnessed the journey from the girl who was exiled to the woman standing here, claiming her own narrative. Inside, the hall had emptied, except for the lingering presence of my parents and Alina. They sat in quiet conversation, voices soft, measured. There were no accusations, no raised tones, just reality. The weight of years hung between them, dense yet bearable now that truth had shattered the walls of deceit. I remembered the first time I had realized the depth of Alina's fear, not the petty childhood anxieties, but a terror that shaped her. Every decision, her secrecy, her manipulations, her quiet betrayal. And now, in the aftermath, I could see her not as an enemy, but as someone crushed under the weight of her own mistakes and the threats that had haunted her. I stepped closer to the railing, letting my fingers graze the cold metal. The ocean roared. Beneath me, waves breaking against jagged rocks, white foam erupting like tiny explosions in the darkness. It mirrored the turmoil that had consumed my life, the highs, the lows, the crashes and retreats of trust and betrayal. I could still feel it, the trembling in my chest when my father had stood during the speeches, the words trembling on his lips. "I believed the wrong daughter, and she deserves to hear the truth." That single moment had unraveled years of silence and suspicion, revealing hidden motives and fears that had lingered in shadow. The night air seemed to pulse with the ghosts of our past. I thought about every sleepless night I had spent wondering if my parents would ever see me for who I truly was, wondering if Alina's secrets would ever come to light, wondering if forgiveness could ever coexist with justice. And yet, here I was. Forgiveness had not come easily. It had demanded clarity, empathy, and courage. It had required me to face the raw, jagged edges of my own pain, and to acknowledge that Alina's actions, while devastating, had sprung from fear and manipulation. I had offered her a bridge, not a weapon, and in doing so, I reclaimed my own power. Daniel's voice broke through my reverie. "You're glowing," he said, almost teasing, but there was awe in his tone. "I've never seen you like this." Allowed a small smile, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease for the first time in years. "I'm tired," I admitted, "but free." There was truth in that word. Free, not from the past, not from the consequences, but free from the suffocating weight of silence, lies, and doubt. The storm had passed, both literally and metaphorically, leaving a clarity I had longed for but never expected to feel so profoundly. I turned slightly to face Daniel, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, steady and unwavering. "Do you realize," I said softly, "that they're sitting in there, talking without shouting? That's progress. That's something we couldn't have imagined a few hours ago." He followed my gaze toward the hall. Indeed, my parents and Alina were no longer prisoners of anger or fear. They were simply humans, flawed, remorseful, but willing to face reality. The subtle gestures, the way my mother reached for Alina's hand, the way my father's shoulders softened, spoke volumes. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was a beginning. I inhaled the salty air, letting it fill the empty spaces inside me. Every year of exile, every tear shed in silence, every unanswered call, it all led to this night. A night where truth had been spoken aloud, where the past could no longer hide in shadow, and where I finally had the agency to define my own story. I leaned against the railing, my eyes following the waves as they rolled endlessly. Each crash, a reminder that life was in motion, unstoppable, relentless. Like the ocean, our lives had shifted and surged, carving new paths through the bedrock of our family. Daniel's hand found mine again. "Whatever happens next," he said, voice low, "we'll face it together." I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth seep into me, grounding me, connecting me to the present, to someone who had witnessed my journey and chosen to stand beside me. "Yes," I whispered, "together." The balcony was quiet now, except for the rhythmic pulse of the ocean and the distant hum of the city lights. A gentle wind tugged at my hair, and I let it brush across my face, cleansing, renewing, a subtle promise of new beginnings. I thought about the years ahead, the work it would take to rebuild trust, the conversations that would still sting, the apologies that would need to be given and received. But I no longer feared them. I had survived the storm. I had survived exile, betrayal, and doubt. And tonight, I was standing on solid ground. For the first time in years, I felt whole. And as I turned back toward the hall, the soft glow of lights illuminating the figures inside, I realized something profound. The past could not be undone, but the future was mine to shape. No one was whispering now. No shadows lurked in corners. Truth had finally exploded into the open, and I, finally, was free to live it. The ocean beneath me roared in affirmation, a timeless witness to the resilience, forgiveness, and courage that had brought me here. The night stretched endlessly, yet within it was a sense of resolution, fragile but undeniable. I drew one last breath of the cold, salt-kissed air, letting the weight of the years fall away. And in that moment, I understood that freedom, forgiveness, and love were not abstract concepts. They were actions, choices, and the unwavering courage to step into the light, no matter how long the darkness had held you. Later that night, long after the guests had left, I was no longer the girl who stood in the rain, abandoned and doubted. I was a woman who had faced the storm and chosen right, and for the first time, the world felt quiet, safe, and full of possibility.